Peter Greenberg's live global travel update is presented to you by Colette. Discover the world. Guided travel since 1918.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last January show, at least, of Global Travel Update. Coming to you today from the studios of WGN here in Chicago. They've let me borrow a little space here today to join you on a very rainy day here in the Windy City. So much to talk about today, and we'll start with some sad news. Of course, the aftermath and the continuing investigation of the crash of the American Airlines plane collision with the Army helicopter in Washington 2 days ago, 2 nights ago, story that I've been covering since a little bit after 9 o'clock Eastern time on Wednesday night. A lot of stuff coming out about it. The wreckage is still in the water, as you can see. It's going to be in the water for quite some time. Not all the bodies have yet been recovered. The investigators are doing whatever they can to, first of all, locate them, and then, of course, extricate them in the best way possible. And then comes the hard work of preserving and locating crucial evidence and getting all of that out of the water and to a place where it can be safely and appropriately examined. The NTSB investigators, as you know, I've been working on these stories for years. I go back, in fact, since I'm in Chicago, to the worst aviation disaster in American history was one I covered. I hate to date myself, but May 25th, 1979. That was American Airlines Flight 191, the DC-10 here, that inverted over O'Hare, killing so many people. It still ranks as the worst aviation disaster in American history. This disaster is a different can of worms. It will take the NTSB investigators quite some time to get the right answers. There should be no rush to answers here. This investigation could go as long as a year or 18 months. Now, the NTSB has announced they're going to give a preliminary report in the next 30 days, but it will not be necessarily a definitive report for a couple of reasons. What the investigators have to do is to painstakingly rule every possible thing out before they can rule any one thing in. This is what we know so far. And again, it's preliminary. We know that the American Eagle plane was at about 500 feet on its final approach to runway 33 at Washington Reagan, DCA. It was only about 30 seconds away from touching down. There was a military helicopter in the vicinity, an Army Black Hawk. They were also allowed to be in that area. And when I mean allowed to be, let me give you some history before we even get to this incident. It goes back to another story I wrote about dating back to September 25th, 1978, a day I remember all too well. Let me give you some history. When I was a correspondent at Newsweek, I was approached one day by a couple of my sources, a pilot for Western Airlines, a pilot for United Airlines. And these are both veteran pilots. And they said, "Can we have lunch with you?" And I knew they wanted to talk about something. And so I went to lunch and they said, "Listen, we're very, very worried about the air environment in which we're flying. The traffic there, it's not being properly controlled. And the airport that they pointed out to as their worst offender, the one they were the most concerned about, was San Diego's Lindbergh Field. They said, too many small airplanes up there, we can't spot them all. And on our approach, we're worried about that." And I said, "Well, how bad is it?" They said, "Would you like us to show you?" I said, "Okay." So we went in their plane and we shot the approach to Lindbergh Field. Oh my God. It was cowboys and Indians up there, right? And nobody was under controlled airspace. I went to Newsweek. That's where I was working then. And I said, "I want to do a story on the accident waiting to happen. This is an ingredient for absolute calamity." And I outlined all the parameters that these pilots gave me. In fact, they were willing to go on record with their airline affiliation, which would be grounds for their dismissal, to talk about how dangerous this airport environment was, the airspace around it. And you know what happened? And I'm still angry about it today. I got an answer from the editors at Newsweek. Let me quote to you verbatim. "Great suggestion on Lindbergh Field, but the editors here would rather wait until there's a crash." Are you kidding me? I left Newsweek in 1977. And on September 25th, 1978, not the unthinkable, the thinkable happened. PSA Flight 182. It was on its flight, a very short flight from Los Angeles to San Diego. They called out traffic. It was in the daytime, not nighttime. The pilots acknowledged the traffic. but the traffic did not see the plane. Flew right to the back of the right wing where it intersected the engine. That photograph there was taken as PSA Flight 182 was barreling to the ground, killing all aboard, and the two pilots in the small plane died as well. As a direct result of that crash, what happened? The Newsweek story that came out the next week was even more insulting. Let me quote verbatim. It said in reporting on the crash, "The problems at Lindbergh Field have long been known." Yeah, no kidding. But something good came out of that. The establishment of something called a TCA. What is a TCA? It's terminal control airspace, right? Meaning a restricted piece of airspace around an airport that no plane can fly into without being given permission, without identifying itself on the transponder with the controllers, which would list the plane's identification, its radio frequency, its direction, its speed, and its altitude. And that TCA now is at every major airport in the United States. It's at Washington Reagan, it's at LAX, it's at Lindbergh Field. You cannot fly into that zone. And at Washington Reagan, it's already the most restricted airspace in the United States because of the airport's proximity to the Capitol and the White House. So now let's go back to 2 nights ago. You had the American Eagle flight obviously cleared to that airspace because it was scheduled to land there, and he was flying exactly where he was supposed to be. You had the Army helicopter who was in that airspace and in communication with the tower, who then told him about the traffic. And the Army pilot acknowledged that he had the traffic and then smashed into the American Eagle plane. What can you deduce from that? Definitively nothing yet, but investigators are looking at the possibility that that Army pilot acknowledged traffic that was not the plane he was supposed to see. There were other planes in the sky that night, and then the unthinkable happened. That's where we are right now. But there are more things that happen here because no plane ever crashes for any one reason. It's a combination of reasons that in concert produce a system or an event from which you can't recover. So in this particular case, were the controllers understaffed that night? They were. Only one. They needed two. Was the airspace congested? Well, it always is over Reagan, right? Everybody talks about it being a clear night. But that doesn't matter because visibility at night is restricted by definition. And to compound matters, there's the possibility that on this Army training mission on the helicopter, they were using night vision goggles, which would actually restrict their vision more in a heavily lit area, which is what the airport around Reagan area is. So you have all these things at work. Plus, was the helicopter flying at the right altitude, or was he 100 or 150 feet higher than he should have been? But even more importantly, what was he doing anywhere near that landing path? All these things are going to be investigated. And keep in mind, we're just in the preliminary stages of this investigation. The wreckage has to come out of the water. It has to be basically collected and then preserved. And my guess is it will be built and reconstructed on a skeleton in an airport hangar somewhere so that the investigators and the metallurgists can look at the way the metal is bent, the point of impact, because then when they have the actual flight data recorder, which they've recovered, and they have the audio transcripts of the cockpit voice recorder, which they've recovered, and they have the audio transcripts of the tower to planes audio, which they have, they can then construct a second-by-second timeline of what happened, when it happened, and ultimately why it happened, which gets me to the next level. What the actual mandate of the NTSB is to determine 2 words, probable cause. But the NTSB doesn't stop there, nor should they. The NTSB goes one step further. Once they establish what they feel is the probable cause, they look for solutions. What would have been the solution in this case to prevent it from ever happening again? And now it goes to the regulatory agency as an urgent safety recommendation. That would be the FAA. And here's where it gets a little depressing, because since the FAA was mandated by an act of Congress in 1935, they were always given a dual mandate, which was by definition impossible to perform. The first mandate, which we all accept, embrace, and support, is to enforce and enact safety regulations. That's a no-brainer. But the second mandate is a conflict of interest. It is to, quote, promote the business of aviation. You cannot do both. During its entire history, from 1935, so 90 years later now, the FAA has not figured out that their clients are not the airlines or the manufacturers. Their clients are United States citizens. Their partners are not the airlines or the manufacturers. And as a result of not understanding that, every time the NTSB makes an urgent safety recommendation, the FAA doesn't necessarily move swiftly. In many cases, they slow walk it. In some cases, they downright ignore it. And the reasoning for that, because the FAA worries about the economic impact on implementing those solutions to the airlines or the manufacturers. Now, I want to preface this by saying I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, but I wouldn't need to be a lawyer to be effectively prosecuting the case I'm about to tell you. Here it is. If I know there's a problem, and then I know there's a solution, and I know the solution is available and can be implemented, and I then make the conscious decision not to implement that solution, that's a prima facie case of criminal negligence. We saw that with the case of the Boeing Max, right? We even saw it back in the days of the Ford Pinto gas tank, right? So what is the FAA going to be doing now? We have a new acting administrator who was appointed as recently as yesterday by President Trump. We have a new head of the Department of Transportation, a new secretary. Are they going to change fundamentally the role of the FAA to doing what it was supposed to do in the first place? Because without that, we have a problem, Houston. We already have a problem with air traffic control. We have 3 air traffic control centers right now that are operating at an 85% staff threshold. That's unacceptable. And in those 3 air traffic control centers, guess what? They're forcing controllers to work overtime. That is the one job on the planet nobody should ever have to be forced to work overtime in, or they're not staffing enough. Now, there's some good news. In the last FAA reauthorization bill passed last year in Congress, there was a provision for the FAA to have enough money to hire about 1,500 new controllers. So that's good news. But wait a minute. They're not working now. There's a very steep learning curve before you become a bona fide controller, 18 months to 2 years before they let you sit at a console by yourself. So we're not out of the woods yet. We have to make this a priority. And we have to change the mandate of the FAA to only mandate A, enact and enforce safety. That should be their only job. I hope you'll agree with me. Obviously, we're going to stay on this story, and we're not going to rush to judgment, as maybe some others have already. And if I can give President Trump some advice here, it's the same advice I'm giving myself. Everything right now is preliminary. It's too soon to make a judgment about this particular case. Let the NTSB do their work. They do incredible work. Let them do that, but then let's listen to them and move quickly to enact their urgent safety recommendations so that what happened on Wednesday night can never be repeated. I hope you'll agree with me. I'm always answering any questions you have about that on this show or any other show, but I had to open with this because it's a story I've been covering for the last 36 hours, moving into the next 48. And I'll welcome your comments and your questions about that. Now, a couple of other things. We're not going to talk about air safety anymore today, but a couple of other things that we want to talk about, and let's have some fun with this one. The new Spirit Airlines dress code. Yay! I didn't even know they had a dress code. But here's the deal. Every airline does have a dress code. Now, the new Spirit dress code very specifically says they will throw you off the plane if you board barefoot. Ta-da! Other airlines are specific as well. Hawaiian Airlines will let you wear shorts, but attention, men, you can't wear Speedos. The other airlines get confusing because it's just general. No lewd clothing, whatever that means. Does that mean exposed breasts or buttocks? Does that mean see-through garments? Or does it also mean wearing tattoos with offensive messages or clothing with offensive or sexual messages? Remember, it's all subjective, and every airline will defer to their gate agents and their flight crews to make that determination. It's sort of like the Supreme Court approach to pornography. What did they say? We can't define what it is, but we know it when we see it. So, for those of you about to fly, before you head to the airport, look in the mirror and say, are they going to throw me off for this? And if you have the basic thinking that they might, pack an extra set of clothing in your carry-on bag because you may need it. Now, there's another provision, not about dress code, but about codes of behavior in general, that's also carried on the airline's code of contract of carriage. And that one is, of course, also subjective. You can be thrown off a plane for offensive bodily odor. Who determines that? Who smelled that? Interesting story there. And of course, when did they smell it? If they smelled it on the ground, you get thrown off. If they smelled it in the air, everybody smelled it. So as a passenger, you have rights. If there's somebody sitting next to you who is really stinky, and you're still on the ground and the jetway door is open, ask to either change your seat or ask the flight attendant to investigate. Because once you're in the air, it's hold your nose time for the duration of the flight. All right, moving on from that. A lot of other things to talk about before we get to your questions. And one thing I want you to put in your date book if you happen to be in New York in April, it's a fascinating story. It was fascinating when it happened 50 years ago. It was fascinating when I reported on it 40 years ago. And I'm not being self-serving, but I won the Emmy for it. They're doing a reunion on April 24th of 2025, a 50th reunion of Operation Baby Lift. Let me set the scene for you. It was April of 1975. Vietnam was days away from collapsing and being overrun by the North Vietnamese. The war was going to be ended. But in Saigon, there were hundreds of Vietnamese orphan children who'd been pre-adopted out to American families. They needed to get them out of the country before the city fell. And the question was, how are they going to get them out? The Defense Department called it Operation Baby Lift. But something else happened, something very tragic, something that was avoidable. And there were military hospital planes, Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, ready to go to get these kids. They were told not to go. Instead, Lockheed apparently lobbied hard with the Defense Department to send a totally inappropriate plane, the massive C-5A cargo plane, at that point, the largest cargo plane ever built, to rescue these kids. And so they sent it. This plane had a history of being defective. The plane landed in Saigon with only a few hours to spare. And they loaded hundreds of kids onto this plane. But wait a minute, it was a cargo plane. On the cargo floor, there were no seats. They were bungee cording these kids onto the floor. There's an upstairs deck with a few seats, but there are not enough seats. So they were cramming 3 kids into every seat, again, bungee cording them. And then off the plane took to go back to the US. But just a few minutes later, at altitude, remember I said it was a defective plane? The rear cargo door blew out. Rapid depressurization. I'm not going to finish the story. You need to hear about it. You need to see it. You can see some of it online to this day. It was a 2020 piece that I co-produced. Again, that won the Emmy, but it did something else. It provided medical care for those kids that were being denied by both the government and Lockheed, who were making the claim in court that these kids weren't damaged by the crash. That's right, the plane crashed. They were damaged by the war, a complete and statistical impossibility. So it's a very good cause. It'll be at the Pan Am Museum in New York, operated by the Pan Am Foundation. And here's the most amazing thing. Some of the pilots of that plane are coming. Some of the medical personnel and Air Force stewards on that plane are coming, the ones who survived. And most remarkably, some of the kids are coming 50 years later. It's a remarkable story. I hope you get a chance to attend. And if you don't, we'll make arrangements to rerun that ABC 2020 piece that we did somewhere near that anniversary date. So I hope you get a chance to see it. Now, let's go and say hello to some folks here, answer some questions. Here's some Priya who said, your conversation with Daniel Pardo from Barcelona in your podcast was intense, but informative. That's the guy who represents the citizens group in Barcelona that wants to end tourism. I mean, perhaps well-intentioned, but certainly misguided. It was a pretty intense interview. You're right. Okay, Paul is saying hi from Ashland, Virginia. Condolences to the victims' families and friends involved in the crash. I have a travel question, but we'll ask next broadcast. I appreciate that, Paul. I'll look forward to it. Scott says he'll see me tomorrow at the travel show. Let me tell you about tomorrow at the travel show. That's why I'm in Chicago. Tomorrow and Sunday, I'll be speaking at the Stevens Convention Center in Rosemont, right outside of Chicago. Tomorrow, February 1st, and Sunday, February 2nd. Part of the travel and adventure shows that I speak at every year around the country. And if you miss me tomorrow, I'll be in Phoenix on the 15th, and of course in LA on the 22nd. But please come and see me. Happy to meet with you and answer any questions that you may have. Thank you, Scott. I'll see you tomorrow. From April says, good morning from Las Vegas. Interested in what you share and prayers to all travelers. As my own opinion, this crash should not have happened. Of course it should not have happened. And my sincere condolences. Thank you, April, for that. Patty Ford says, rainy Chicago. You know it is. But on a day like today, on the last day of January, I have to say it's better than snowy Chicago. Okay. Let's go to Matthew, who says, offering condolences. Thank you, Matthew. Barbara's saying, it's raining here too. Okay. Woodstock, Georgia. Okay. Let's see here. Oh, hello to John and to Hari. And oh my goodness, a lot of people. Patty's saying, saw smoke from 15 plus miles. Oh, I'm sorry to hear about that, Patty. Tim is saying, have you ever thought about auctioning yourself for a lunch with Peter? Actually, to tell you the truth, Tim, I used to do that a lot, either lunch or dinner, for benefiting a number of charities. And you know what? Let me check and see if I can benefit one of those charities again today, and we'll do that. How about that? Okay, Lorena says, rainy in Lansing, Michigan, as opposed to 90 and hot in Kenya last week. Hard to get warmed up here. I understand. All right. Jim and John saying, okay, hands in the air. I got you. Mike saying, just back from Jackson Hole, sunny, cold, and expensive. That's not a shock to me about Jackson Hole. Debbie saying hello from Boynton Beach. Lynn is saying, sorry about the weather, but welcome to our city. For those of you who don't know, I spent 5 years as a Badger in Madison, Wisconsin. So I was in Chicago coming down the I-90 every weekend I could. It was my liberation. I love Madison. I'm sitting here today because of Madison, but Chicago really was, and to this day, I describe Chicago as America's biggest, most underrated great city. It's amazing as a city. I love it. I love it. I love it. Gina's saying hi from San Diego. There's Jim and Harriet. Nice to see you again. Dan saying, thanks for the insight of this disaster. Just listening to me on WGN Radio right here with John Williams. So I'm going to miss you tomorrow, Dan, but thank you for saying that. Tayo saying, would you deem DCA Airport risky to fly in and out of? No, I don't. Remember, the airports with the most difficult approaches tend to be the airports with the best safety records because the pilots are paying attention. The old Hong Kong airport, Kai Tak, what a crazy approach. St. Bart's, what a crazy approach. Tegucigalpa in Honduras, oh my goodness, what a crazy approach. And Washington National is really no different. I call it Washington National. That's old school. Washington Reagan is really no different in approach in terms of runway length and surrounding geography than New York's LaGuardia. And I fly there all the time. I'm not worried. Okay. Here we go to Paul. This is the Swiss cheese model. When all the holes in the Swiss cheese line up, catastrophe happens. Well, there's another little phrase that is being used, the tombstone mentality. We only act after people die. Look, we have an opportunity in so many areas of our life to understand what the problem is and to understand what the solution is. For example, many of you know that I'm a fireman in New York. This is not what I'm going to suggest now as new technology. Why aren't we burying power lines all over the United States, let alone the world? Why do you think that the fire happened in Maui? Power lines. All the fires that we have in California, 90% of them, power lines. Why didn't they bury them? There was nothing technically barring them from doing that. They didn't want to spend the money. It was a CFO mentality that was more worried about cost than worth. How much is that fire costing now, right? There's another thing they should be doing. It's a no-brainer. You run about 3 miles of very wide pipe, 2 miles into the ocean off the coast of California with about a 40-foot diameter strainer, and you run that pipe to 2 different connections. One, a desalination plant, and one, just another pumping station. During normal times, you desalinate the water and you continue that pipe up through Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado, and New Mexico. They need it. During an emergency, you switch it and it goes to a pumping station which supplies the fire departments with an unlimited supply of water. What am I missing? My fire department is on an island in New York. We do something called drafting. That's what we're really talking about here. When we have a fire, we take a special hose and we drop it into the Great South Bay. And that's our source of water, unlimited source of water to put out the fire. We're not depending on fire hydrants or wells that could go dry or lose pressure. The pressure is coming from our own fire trucks. This is a no-brainer, just like it's a no-brainer to fix the FAA. It's not like we don't know. We do know. And because we know, now we should be liable if we don't do something about it. Okay. Tim wants to know, what day of the week do we pick the photo of the week? Usually on Thursday, by the way, or the day before I go on the air with you guys. Evelyn's saying greetings from MCO. All right, greetings back to you. Camilla's saying greetings from Tucson. John wants everybody to know today's his birthday. He's 36. Happy birthday, John. Jack's saying hello from Indiana. And Jack and Diane, we know that song. Okay, Joy is saying, when going on vacation, do you pay daily for the people who clean your room or pay after your stay? Or do you ask them, are they still going to be there until the end of your day? There's no one answer for that. But I always suggest that you tip housekeeping. They're the hardest working people in the hotel, and they can be your saviors. Seriously. So if you don't know if they're going to have the next shift on the next day after you're there, then you know what? Tip $5 a day for every day you're there. You need to do that. They deserve it. They need it. Do it. Okay, Chuck says, I was flying on an award ticket. My flight, AA domestic, was delayed 6 hours. Am I entitled to compensation? You bet you are. Whether you're a frequent flyer award ticket or you're a regular ticket, you're a positive space ticket. You are entitled to that compensation. Hello from Tulsa to Gene. Mark says the news media said the chopper was flying VFR. Don't understand how you can fly VFR at night. They were in control. They were in contact with the tower. They were transponding, so they knew where they were. They were flying VFR, but they still had no reason to be in that particular area. We all know about the chopper traffic in Washington, D.C. It's intense. I guarantee you they will now exist. They will now create a new, bigger TCA around Reagan, which will now not allow any other choppers, other for emergency purposes, to enter that airspace. John Lample saying hi from Miami, back in warmer weather. You got it, John. Sue saying hi from Bellingham. Tayo says, with a shortage of air traffic controllers, who should we reach out to, continuing to ring the alarm? Your elected representatives. You know what? It's very easy to find out who sits on the House or Senate Aviation Subcommittee. Talk to them. This needs to be addressed immediately. All right. Mark's saying hello from the Flowery Branch in Georgia. Patty's saying, Spirit flies warm islands. Well, for the moment they do. Remember, even though they filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, they are still operating as an airline. Don't forget that, okay? Our friend Chuck Marduk's always appreciate. Thank you, Chuck, for those nice words about aviation. You know what? Let's keep going on that. I appreciate you supporting my position on the FAA. Okay, let's keep going here. Charlie Winham, my good pal from Louisiana, who got snowed in last week. So I missed seeing him in New York. That's right. There was snow in Louisiana. But Charlie, nice to see you at least online here. Okay. I know there are good restaurants in Rosemount where I'm speaking tomorrow. You might find me at Gibson's. You might. Could happen. Okay. And I know that you agree, Patty, that Madison is a great place like Chicago. I agree. And Mike says, go Badgers. A word about that. We didn't go to a bowl game this year. First time in 22 years we were not bowl eligible. I'll give you a reason why. Someone needs to talk to the offensive coordinator of the Wisconsin Badgers and tell them that every play should not be, let's run it up the middle. Wow, that's innovation, huh? Okay. All right. Oh, shalom from Israel. Hello, Aviv. And Gina's saying, love Chicago. Does texting using cellular during flight landing interfere with flight communications? It does not. Let me look. There's an old airplane rule, but it doesn't hold water. The one thing the FAA did through their testing labs was they tested every piece of avionics in the cockpit to 100 times the RF interference given off by any electronic device. Meaning, in the old days, a Sony Walkman, your phone, a game, your computer, and they found zero interference. The only thing that created interference on navigational instruments on the plane was the one thing none of you carry, a high-powered marine band radio. So if you're ever on a plane and you see a guy walking on the plane with a big box on his back and a whiplash antenna, get the hell off the plane. Other than that, the airlines know, and the FAA knows there is no interference. Okay. Joan says, rain is on the way to the Bay Area today. I'm grateful for that, but on a different note, I do hope we can continue to have confidence in our federal agencies. Me too. There are a lot of hardworking people at the FAA, don't get me wrong. They're an amazing group of people at the NTSB, at the Federal Trade Commission, at the Food and Drug Administration, but they need proper direction and support to do the job they were originally mandated to do. Okay. All right. Our good friend Bruce Dante saying hello from St. Augustine, America's oldest city or town. All right. Go to the Pirate Museum. I'm kidding. All right. Now it's time to go to the photo of the week. And there it is. Hey, congratulations to Mr. Jarrett's for doing this picture. You know where it is. Taken right above or below the bridge of his cruise ship, going through the old locks, not the new ones, at the Panama Canal, about to be our 52nd state. Just kidding. But anyway, congratulations to Gene. And if you think you've got, it's Janine. I'm sorry, Janine. It's Janine. If you think your photo qualifies for the photo of the week just like Janine's, you know what to do. Just send it into photo contest at petergreenberg.com and we'll post it right up there. We appreciate that. And then last but not least, I do a number of television shows from the Royal Tour to our show, The Travel Detective. We also do another series for the last 11 years called Hidden. And let me tell you the history of that show. The concept of Hidden is no gift shop, no tour bus, no brochure, no guidebook, and certainly no TripAdvisor stickers. I take you to the most extraordinary experiences in a destination that nobody knows about, but that's totally accessible to you. So far in the last couple of years, we've done Hidden Ireland, Hidden Turkey, Hidden Poland, Hidden Aegean, Hidden Canary Islands, Hidden Belize. We've done a few U.S. states, Hidden Mississippi, Hidden Louisiana. And now, going back to that continent, we're about to premiere on PBS next month, Hidden Uganda. Take a look.
Coming soon on PBS, Hidden Uganda, and a journey down the longest river in Africa.
Hey, Peter! We on the Nile!
We are on the Nile. And as the river switches back and forth, from rapid to calm, my goal is just to make sure I stay on and not in the Nile. To use the words hold on tight is an understatement. You're literally bull riding on the water, and you're going to get wet. Just part of what you'll see on Hidden Uganda.
Remember, there's a really good reason why Winston Churchill described that country as the Pearl of Africa. We're going to go not just to the Nile, we're going to go to Murchison Falls, we're actually going to go to a place that most people don't even know exists in Uganda, where we scout Major League Baseball players. That's right. They're actually doing baseball in Uganda right now, and a couple of these guys are going to the majors. It's pretty interesting to see in the middle of the jungle. And of course, the mountain gorillas. That and a few other surprise animals that normally you wouldn't see on a regular tour. So join me, check a look on the listings on your local PBS stations, and keep in mind that about a month and a half after it premieres on PBS, it then streams on Amazon, Apple TV Plus, and later this year on YouTube as well. So I hope you get a chance to join me on that. Again, we're working on many more of these shows. This year we'll be shooting in Hong Kong, we'll be shooting in Malta, we'll be shooting in Bulgaria, we'll be shooting in Namibia, and premiering shortly after Uganda will be a fascinating show, Hidden Alabama, with my special guest, Martin Luther King III. An amazing tour guide, I'd say. In the meantime, from rainy Chicago in the studios of WGN, first of all, thank you to Anthony Protaschuk for doing the engineering in Los Angeles today. I'll be speaking tomorrow again at the Stevens Convention Center in Rosemont. I hope you'll join me from 12:30 to 1:30 tomorrow and again on Sunday. In the meantime, we will continue to monitor the investigation and report on that as I've done throughout this week, the last couple of days. And of course, this investigation is just getting started. Our hearts and prayers go out to the victims' families. What a devastating loss. And as I'm sure we will discover as the investigation determines the probable cause, an avoidable one. That's the worst tragedy of all. Everybody be safe, travel well, and I'll see you next week.
Peter Greenberg's live global travel update is presented to you by Colette. Discover the world. Guided travel since 1918.